All right, moving on to rational functions. So the key to all of this is factoring. You got to remember that there's GCF factoring, there's difference of squares factoring, and then just the regular x factoring. We never had, the grouping method with 4. So just remember GCF, difference of squares, and making the x. So in the first 6 problems, because it's all multiplying and dividing, I will be factoring everything, numerators, denominators. So I'll always start with the GCF. So when I start with my first fraction and I look at the there is no GCF. And when I look at the denominator, there's no GCF. So I'm going to go straight to my x now. The top part is easy factoring. What are factors of -5 that get me to -4? And those are going to be 1 and 5. With the 5 being negative. So here's my numerator. It'll become x plus 1 and x minus 5. And then my denominator, I'll need factors of -15 that get me to -14. And that's going to be a -15 and 1x. But this is not easy factoring, so you will need to rewrite it. And then do your grouping method. And in my first set of parentheses, I can take a 3x out and get x minus 5, which the other one already is, but you have to take something out. So take a 1 out, not a 0, because if you have 0 here, remember, it's got to distribute back in. And when you have 0 times this x, that means you wouldn't even have anything there. But 1 times x gives you this x above. So now my denominator will be 3x plus 1 and x minus 5. All right, so at this point, my x minus 5s will cancel out. This is not asked anywhere on the page, but if it were, domain restrictions are x can't be 5 and x can't be -1/3 due to my denominator. But factoring, taking out my common factors, I'll have that, and my final answer is x plus 1 over 3x plus 1. Put them in parentheses or not. So number 2, I'm going to factor. So looking at my numerator, I can not only factor out an x, but I'm going to factor out a -1x. And my denominator, there is no GCF. So starting with the top, I'm going to take out a -1, and then I'll have x plus 3. And in the bottom, I already looked for a GCF, so I need factors of 6x squared that get me to 5x, and that'll be 2x and 3x. So joining my numerator will be x plus 2 over x plus 3. And now the x plus 3's as factors can cancel out, and your answer is -1 over x plus 2. If it had asked about the domain restrictions, my denominator would tell me that x cannot be -2 or -3. All right, moving to number 3. Again, I'm going to factor everything. So just running through real quick. There is a GCF here, so I'll be taking that out, but there is no GCF in this or this or this. So starting my factoring, the top left, I can take an x out and get x minus 5. That's it. The denominator is not factorable. Moving on to the next fraction, the denominator is not factorable, but the top is. So what are factors of 3x squared that get me to 4x? Those are 3 and 1. This is easy factoring, so I'll have x plus 3 and x plus 1. So taking common stuff out, the x plus 3's can go, the x's can go, and when I'm done, I'm left with x minus 5 and x plus 1. And again, if I am looking at domain restrictions, this one will say x cannot be 3, and this one will say x cannot be 0. So even though it's not asked, I'm just bringing it up. All right, number 4, same thing. I'm going to first quickly run through and see if there's a GCF. There's not one there. There's not a GCF here. There is one here. I'll be able to take out a 3x, and there's not a GCF here. So I'm actually going to start with the top right one. So I'll take a 3x out and be left with x plus 4. I'm going to go to the bottom. Factors of -3 that get me to -2 are 3 and 1x, and the 3 will be negative. This is easy factoring, so x minus 3 and x plus 1. And then going to the top left, these will also be easy factoring. Factors of -6 that get me to -1 are -3 and 2x, so that'll turn into x minus 3 as easy factoring and x plus 2. And then finally the bottom, what are factors of 16x squared that get me to 8x? And that would be 2 4x's. And it's easy factoring, so x plus 4 and x plus 4. So what we'll be canceling out are the x minus 3's, one of the x plus 4's, and then that's it. So my final answer is a 3x with the x plus 2 and an x plus 4 in the denominator with an x plus 1. And if I do look at domain restrictions, these will both say that x can't be 4. This will say that x can't be 3, and this one will say that x can't be negative 1. So x cannot be negative 4, 3, or negative 1. All right, 5 and 6, and then I'm going to go eat lunch. So first thing, these are division. Remember with division, you copy, dot, and flop. So copy, dot, and flop, and copy, and dot, and flop. So I'm going to actually start with the right fraction and flip-flop them. So this x minus 4, I cannot factor. It will go to the top. And this 2x squared, I can't factor, and it will go to the bottom. When I go to my left fraction, I always start with the GCF here, and I can take out a 2x squared and be left with x plus 5. And when I go to my denominator, I can take a 2 out of there and be left with x squared minus 4x minus 2. And when I try to factor this one further, it's not factorable. There aren't factors of negative 2 that get me to negative 4. So this will just stay the way it is. So what are things I can take out? There's actually not much. I can take out this 2x squared for this 2x squared, and then that's it. My final answer is x plus 5 on top, x minus 4 on the bottom, and then the 2 with this, and there we go. And the next one, I'm going to copy dot flop. So if you look at that second fraction, technically it's over 1. So the 1 will move to the top, and then x squared minus 9 is a difference of squares. It'll turn into x plus 3 and x minus 3. And then on the other fraction, x plus 2 will stay where it is. And then this is easy factoring. I need factors of 21 that get me to negative 10, and that'll be a negative 3 and a negative 7. And it's easy factoring, so I'll have x minus 3 and x minus 7. And now going through what can I take out? What are those common factors? It'll be 1x minus 3, and that's it. So my answer is x minus 7 on top, and x plus 2 and x plus 3 on the bottom. Now, I didn't talk about this in the other one, but just remember, as far as domain restrictions, that in the original problem, this is a denominator and this is a denominator. But in the original problem, while this whole thing is a numerator, this whole part then is its denominator. So when I look over here, I'll be checking for all of this for domain restrictions, and that didn't show up very well. But I would not pick then negative 2, 3, or negative 3. Okay? And that is that part. We'll get to the adding, subtracting, and solving in just a moment.